I'm so excited to receive my parcel from Derwent. I've partnered up with Derwent to try out their new watercolour paint pan set. Let's see how I get on. Here are the 24 gorgeous colours, such a variety of colours to paint with. I like the compact palette here, plenty of room to mix colours. It also comes with a push button brush pen as well. I'm going to paint the shadows of the clouds first, so I'm mixing up some of the spectrum blue with a little bit of the poppy red. You could use cerulean and cadmium red. I'm also mixing up some of the blue with a little bit of terracotta, which makes a beautiful subtle grey. I've wet the sky and I'm going to paint the sky wet in wet. I've taken off the excess paint there and I'm starting on the horizon with this lovely soft blue-grey colour using one of Derwent's water brushes. For a full list of the materials I'm using, please see the description below. So I'm just continuing on here, making the clouds bigger, the shadows of the clouds here, wet in wet, using the paper towel to control the wetness of my brush there. And I'm going to work my way up to the top of the sky, wet into wet. So I'm always using that paper towel to control the amount of paint on my brush so it doesn't bleed too much. I want those clouds to stay put but have soft edges. And this is kind of damp into wet or damp into damp. Make sure you're not painting on top of puddles. You want a sheen on the paper, not shiny puddles. And I'm just adding a little bit more of the terracotta there just to make this colour darker, painting damp into damp there. I'm going to allow the painting to dry. I've wet the road and I'm mixing up raw sienna and I'm painting wet into wet. Just on the edge of the road. Adding a little bit of sort of bigger shapes in the foreground there, as you can see, and some marks going through the middle of the road there, making it stronger and wider in the foreground area. Loading the brush with the grey that I made earlier, that's the spectrum blue with the poppy red, and painting this wet into wet. And I'm just adding a little bit more of the terracotta with the blue and making this darker in the foreground, damp into damp. And again, this will create depth in your painting. And I must say, I've not used these paints before and they are creating the most beautiful colours. I'm using some table salt and I'm sprinkling it onto the foreground of the road there. I am using the grass green with a little bit of the lemon cadmium to make a really lovely limey green and applying it with Derwent's flat synthetic brush. Wet on dry on the left hand side here. Loading the brush again, painting on the right hand side. It's always a good idea when you are mixing colours just to always add a little bit of something else so it's not all the same flat colour. So I've actually added some of the grass green along with the olive green and I'm spoilt for choice with all these yummy greens. I must say it's great when you've just got them in the pans and you can just, you know, dip in and just play around with them. And I'm finding the paints vibrant, smooth and consistent. Having 24 pans of various colours allows me to mix a variety of colours. I've got the freedom to do it and there are enough different colours in this paint set to allow me to paint seascapes, landscapes, still life, portraiture, etc. I'm now adding some of the Kingfisher blue along with a little bit of that copper beech colour to create a little bit of a darker green, and I'm painting this wet on dry at the top with the flat brush and pushing it into the damp paint underneath. And you can see it's really blended quite nicely together. These paints are really lovely to use. I'm also able to get some really nice textures, as you can see at the top of the bushes on the left. Adding a little bit more of the raw sienna and just painting smaller marks as it goes off into the distance. I'm using Derwent's fan brush just to pull up some of that wet paint to create some textures at the top of the bushes. And I'm just sort of dipping my fan brush into the terracotta and a little bit of the jade green and bottle green. So literally mixing them in the palette and then sort of almost applying it wet on dry. It has actually dried quite quickly. I do like the paper surface. It is cold press. It's got a nice texture. Great for landscape painting. And I'm just applying now a little bit more of the terracotta, jade green, bottle green, and sort of tapping using the fan brush to create textures and to make the sort of foliage and bushes look more natural. These marks, I want to create natural looking marks, and that's what I really love about these technique brushes. So just tapping away here to create a variety of marks to make it look natural. This was a photograph I actually took when I was a passenger in the front seat of the car, and we were going along a lovely sort of lane in Norfolk, and I just thought, great sky, sort of great sort of perspective here as the road sort of narrows and appears to meet, so it looks much further away when you draw it and paint it like that. So using the fan brush to create grasses on the side of the road there, it's so effective at creating details. Mixing up some more grass green and some of the lemon for a lovely limey green colour, and painting the distant fields wet on dry with the Push Button Waterbrush there. I'm mixing up some of the ultramarine there, a little bit of the green I made earlier, and a touch of the raw sienna and a few other greens thrown in for good measure. But what I'm doing is I'm just painting the distant trees, and it's quite a cool colour, cool recede, so it looks further away, and of course smaller marks as well, using the tip of the brush there. A little touch of detail here, sort of in the middle distance as it goes off in the distance, just to create some detail but not too much. Otherwise it will make the painting look flat. If you paint too much detail, it'll come forward. I think I'll leave the painting to dry naturally to allow the salt to work. And as you can see in the foreground, it's worked really nicely, creating lovely light textures. I'm mixing up some of the bottle green and terracotta, and it's just to paint the Telegraph Poles here. And they're smaller as they're off in the distance and paler. And as they come towards us, they get sort of wider, taller and stronger in tonal value. And that creates depth in the painting. And that's why I love painting, because you can use all of these artistic tools to make a 2D surface look 3D. So I'm just sort of finessing here using this wonderful rigger. Love this rigger. It's a synthetic rigger, but it just does what you need it to do. You can almost draw with this rigger. So I've actually invented a few telegraph poles. I've added a few just to create more depth, more information, more detail, to make my painting look more interesting. You don't have to copy a photograph. It's there as a reference, so you can create from it. So mixing up some more greens, I've got a variety there. I think I dipped my brush into a few of those, a little bit of the grass green, bottle green, and just adding some textures and details just in this middle ground here, just to add that information. And I'm using the rigger, and this is all wet on dry. And I'm gradually painting towards the middle ground and foreground, wet on dry, still using my rigger. Always remember to keep loading that brush with paint and keep varying the colours if you can, just to make your painting look more interesting. So I'm just mixing some more of that ultramarine. You can use some bottle green there for darker grasses, wet on dry in the foreground there. Again, using the rigger, which I absolutely love this brush. I'm adding some more details here, some more grasses in the foreground, bigger marks because it's nearer to us, adding some of the deep cadmium to some of the greens there just to vary them again, making them brighter and stronger in the foreground. More ultramarine, one of my favourite colours, such a useful colour. As you saw there, I added some mango, which is like a cadmium yellow deep. I've added that to the ultramarine just to create some more interesting darker greens in the foreground. I'm using one of Derwent's swordliner brushes to paint some of the grasses here and there. Pressing down, you get some really interesting shapes. And I'm just sort of trying out the different yellows, and I just love sort of mixing different yellows with different greens or blues to get variety, and that's what I'm getting here. And the paint sort of really responds to just a damp brush and gives you plenty of paint to work with. I am mixing up some of the greens there and ultramarine, a little bit of the mango. I'm having so much fun with these colours. I'm using Derwent's comb brush, which gives me nice foliage effects there. I'm mixing up some of the orange here, which was so vibrant. What a beautiful, strong colour. I could see some sort of orange wildflowers in the hedgerow. So I'm sort of stippling using this comb brush, and it was really effective. I was going back and forth just to create some of these marks. I like to turn my painting sideways. It gives me a different viewpoint, so I don't sort of keep looking at it the same way where I can miss things or overpaint things. So I'm just sort of tapping my brush merrily with that colour, adding a little bit more green with this comb brush, just having lots of fun. Ultramarine, mango, the bottle green, just to create lots and lots of texture and detail. I'm mixing up some ultramarine, and you could use the bottle green or a dark green, or even quinacridone gold, just to make a dark green. I'm kind of using a dry brush effect. There's not a lot of paint on my brush. As you saw, I took the excess paint off on the paper towel. I'm kind of scrubbing this brush onto the textured surface, varying the marks to create the look of bushes or small trees here. I'm painting some birds in the sky, wet on dry with the rigger, and I'm using the ultramarine and terracotta and just varying the sizes. I'm just painting in some sort of branches here, wet on dry, using the rigger. And just to create a bit of interest. You can't really see them in the photograph, so it's a little bit of artistic license. But I've turned the painting upside down because I actually find it easier, and you might also find it easier, painting small branches and twigs. So just adding a little bit more to the left here, wet on dry. And just as a little tip, if you paint quite quickly, lots of thin lines and marks, it will give the illusion of lots of small branches. So give it a go and have a practice. So I've allowed the painting to dry once more. What I'm doing now is I'm mixing up a little bit more of the Spectrum Blue. I'm going to paint the sky. Now, watercolour isn't permanent, as I said earlier, so you need to gently wet the sky, and I'm using the foam brush. I'm very gently wetting it with clean water down to the horizon again. And I'm just being very mindful not to disturb the paint underneath. And what I'm doing now is I'm painting the positive shapes. I painted the negative shapes with the shadows. I'm now painting the blue sky using this Spectrum Blue. You can use cerulean. This is wet into wet, and I'm using the flat brush. The colour at the top of the sky will be stronger because it's the foreground. I've swapped to a smaller brush, and I'm painting smaller blue sort of washes as it goes through the centre of the sky and towards the horizon. And I'm using the Push Button Waterbrush. It allows me to dilute the colour as I go towards the horizon. I'm going to allow the painting to dry once more. I'm masking out the road with some paper towel. So I've mixed up some of the ultramarine with a little bit of the terracotta, and I'm spattering just the sort of bottom of the road, wet on dry, the area that's nearest to us, to create depth and detail in the painting. So I decided to add some people. Again, working from my imagination, I'm using the rigger, and I'm just using the ultramarine with the terracotta, painting wet on dry. And I'll put a link in the description below of my people painting tutorial. But I keep it really, really simple. Tiny, tiny heads, arch windows for the bodies, and 2 sticks for the legs, one longer than the other, so it looks like they're walking. Adding people creates life and movement in a painting. I've created some cast shadow there below the people, but also from the telegraph poles. The light is coming from the right, so the shadows will be on the left. I thought it'd be quite nice to add some detail to the people, some colour. So they're like the focal point. So I'm adding some of the orange and poppy red as a scarf to the person on the right, using the rigger wet on dry. So there's a close up here. So it creates a little bit of movement because the wind looks like it's sort of coming from the left. I decided to add a few more birds to add a little bit more life to my painting. And to finish off, I've decided to spatter. So I protected my sky and the hedgerow, and I'm spattering some of the poppy red to look like poppies. And there were lots of poppies on my visit to Norfolk. So I've removed the washi tape to reveal a lovely white border. I'm adding some wires to the telegraph poles to lead the eye into the painting using the rigger with a mix of the ultramarine and the terracotta. So here is the finished painting. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, especially me demonstrating the new Derwent paint pan set with all those delicious colours. I was spoilt for choice. They were vibrant, they mixed so well. They'd be perfect for beginners and perfect for outdoor painting because of the portability of the palette. There's plenty of mixing space as well for small and large washes. More details about the watercolour paint pan set and the other materials I used in this tutorial can be found in the description below. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to Derwent for sending me this amazing watercolour paint pan set. And thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy painting. Bye for now.